Russia's presidential election next week won't result in any dramatic change in the Kremlin. Still, why does the 2024 election matter? For more, we're joined by Professor Mason Richey this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with how voting works over in Russia. Isn't this year's a little different from previous ones?
Yeah, it is. Russia holds direct elections for president. In theory, they're multi-party, but all of Vladimir Putin's challengers are from friendly parties who are expected to lose. All Russians who are 18 and older, including in Russian-occupied territories and Russians overseas, can vote. Turnout in 2018, the last time there was an election, the president has a 6-year term in Russia, was 68%. But there were questions about vote rigging, ballot box stuffing, forced voting, other forms of manipulation. There are going to be some changes this year. For the first time, Russia is going to have multi-day voting for president. They've tried that before, back in 2021, for a constitutional change to allow Vladimir Putin to have extra terms. But it's the first time that there will be a multi-day, or in this case, 3-day voting for president. That will take place on March 15, 16, and 17, although there's already been some early voting in the eastern Siberian provinces. Also, this time there will be online voting, and there are some major questions about how fair that process is going to be, how transparent it's going to be, what types of potential manipulation is there. Another change, of course, is that this time those in Crimea and in the Russian-occupied territories in eastern Ukraine will also be able to vote for president.
Right, you mentioned all but Putin will or are expected to lose. Isn't the election all but pretty much guaranteed for Putin, allow him to extend his long leadership at least, 2030?
Yeah, in this type of authoritarian system, you don't hold an election unless you're certain that you're going to win. And there's indeed widespread belief that all of the pieces have been put in place for Putin to be able to comfortably win this without any thought that there would be an opposition candidate who would actually have a chance to be even remotely a challenger to his re-election.
Professor Richey, you mentioned this earlier briefly. There have always been questions over the fairness of Russia's presidential election. The question is, will the 2024 one be free and fair?
So the sad truth is that Russia, and before that, the Soviet Union, has a long history of unfair and unfree elections. And this was obviously the case during the time of Stalin and Khrushchev and Brezhnev, and during the Soviet times. But even in the 1990s, the period that was supposed to be the liberal reform and opening up, Russian election manipulation was a problem. There's even a famous joke when Boris Yeltsin was running for re-election. He was in the joke in a campaign rally and says to the people, if you re-elect me, you're going to get a brand new president. And the crowd yells back, what if we don't elect you? And he says, then you'll get the same old president. So it's not like this is unfortunately a new problem. Things have really only gotten worse. There are, of course, reports of overstuffing ballots. There are possibilities for digital manipulation this time in the online voting. But in part, and perhaps even in major part, Russian elections are unfair and unfree because there's no meaningful opposition, as we've seen most recently with the elimination of Alexei Navalny, and state media manipulates public opinion in Putin's favor systematically.
Right, plus online voting, it doesn't look like that's going to help in any way. And it's highly likely that there will be no surprise in the election results. But still, why is Russia's 2024 presidential election important in any way?
So, in the first place, it's important because, although it's unfair and unfree, it does, this election, function as a way of legitimating, again, President Putin's mandate in office. It may not be fair and may not be free, but juridically speaking, it gives him another 6-year mandate, from which he can legally operate as president. more, I think, importantly, in some sense, in terms of what we can actually learn about the state of Russia and about Putin's power there, is that turnout is going to matter. The percentage of people who come out to vote, particularly compared to previous elections, is going to indicate something about the support for Putin in a time of war. And so, if the voting turnout increases, and if it looks like, to the best that we can tell from, the sort of independent, to the extent that they exist, observers on the ground, we'll be able to get some idea of how important or how significant Putin's support is popularly. Of course, he's going to win, but there'll be a big difference if there's, let's say, a 55 to 60% turnout versus a 75% turnout. If turnout's 75 or 80% this time, then it seems like maybe we can infer that, despite all of the problems in Russia, he does have Putin some significant popular support. If the turnout looks like it's 55 to 60%, which would be 8 to 10 points less than in 2018, then that might indicate that there is some softening for support from him during this time of war.
Right, the exact figure could be a barometer of, checking his leadership domestically. Now, on Wednesday, we have to talk about how Alexei Navalny's widow, Yulia, called on Russians to join a massive election day protest against Putin. How big do you think the protest will be? I mean, will the move be a blow to Putin at all?
So, the short answer is I don't really know an answer to that, but obviously, Putin has all of the tools to prevent protests that authoritarian leaders have, and that he has, of course, used before. This means, in the first place, and most obviously, the use of police and domestic security forces in order to crack down on protesters. We've already been seeing that happening over the last several months, and even more so since Navalny was murdered, and there have been these very small, brave protests in sort of support in memoriam for him. But in addition to that, in the digital world that we live in today, Putin and other dictators have additional tools such as facial recognition software, mobile phone tracking, so that even if the security forces and the police forces can't crack down immediately on protests, they still have the ability to track down protesters after the fact. And so this obviously causes a significant chilling effect on the degree to which people are willing to go out and protest. So, I think if you take all of those factors together, we're likely to see some sporadic protests, but they're likely to be somewhat disorganized and somewhat disunited. And that also seems to be what a number of the opposition figures are saying in Russia when they're discussing in advance to what extent there is going to be mass protest in Russia this time.
Right. We'll see how that turns out and how the elections turn out in a week. All right, Professor Richey, thank you so much for your insight. As always, you have a great day.
Great. Thanks for having me.